this next panel, we want to talk about how to use the mainnet and how to use public blockchains in business. Paul just gave us a great conversation as to where things are from his perspective and what is needed to be done. But I think it'd be beneficial for all of us and the experts that have been put around this table to dive one level deeper and find out really where we are and kind of what those next steps are to begin implementing from all of your views. And to welcome on our guests. Oh, last one just joined. Here we go. We all know Paul. Taj, I want to welcome from the Ethereum Foundation. Mr. Whalen, welcome as well from the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and also Bancor. And then John Wolpert, I feel like does not need an introduction, but we'll give him one anyways, who is a part of Consensus, but also leading the Baseline protocol, which we're going to hear a little bit about now, and the second half of our show get a little bit more into. York will be joining us in just a moment from Microsoft, who has been a part of this big collective that Paul had mentioned to us before. So guys, without further ado, first question. Welcome, York. Where are we?
Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, loud and clear.
Awesome.
Where are we when it comes to really blockchain and Ethereum, the mainnet, all three pieces in the enterprise? And Paul, I want to start with you. You just went, but then we'll go around, and I would love to hear everyone's opinion. Paul, we can't hear you, so I'm gonna jump over to Taj. Taj, same question to you. Where are we really at with it, with enterprise in the with blockchain in the enterprise? Pardon me. And Paul, go ahead and reset if you need to, and we'll continue going.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty early days. I mean, as Paul was saying earlier, enterprises have been kicking private chains around for a few years, but it's really, really early days for enterprises to start using public chains. But I think the tide is turning, as Paul was talking about, and we're seeing, like, every day I'm reading about new enterprise applications being built on Ethereum Mainnet. So really, I'm seeing a wave starting right now, and I think it's going to be a big change in the next year.
And John, what about yourself? What do you feel, and where do you see things at today?
So number one, my employer is Banco Santander, one of the largest banks in Europe, not Bancor, but Banco Santander. Number two, I am the chairman of the board of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. We're one of the very few banks in the world that has actually done a real security issuance on the public blockchain. Tokenized cash leg, tokenized security leg, on-chain delivery versus payment, right? And your question is, where are enterprises with regards to use of, let's say, mainnet and similar? Very, very early stages, particularly in regulated industries. But I will say this, we're now beyond proofs of concept. For instance, the work that we did last year, and I'm very proud of the team that I work with, not just at Santander, but in the other financial institutions that are pushing the envelope as well. We actually validated for sure that you can issue a real, properly regulated, properly compliant, completely valid in the eyes of external regulators and internal compliance and new products committees and all the things a bank would need to do in order to issue a real bond, a real security, on and anchor it and clear it and settle it, the complete thing on a public blockchain. Now, a lot of the work that has been done to date, it's still experimental, but it's not proof of concept. I would say that we're kind of in pilot mode. Now we're talking about real money systems, like real money bank grade, stable coins, the discussion of, what was an esoteric concept just a few years ago, commonly known as CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, has become an ordinary topic now among people like this on this call. So I would say we're still at the early stages. I think that there's been some very meaningful work that's been done in the past 12 months, at least in the financial industry, that prove for once and for all that this can be done for real. Now, understanding that there's still problems related to privacy, permissioning, performance, scalability, and all of these things that we know about and have known about for years. But I think that we're looking at major technical advances in both, let's say, scalability, major technical advances, and hats off to Paul Brody and John Wolpert and others with regards to privacy techniques that allow companies to interact on a blockchain without sharing anything that's visible, fully compliant with GDPR and all these things as well. So early stages, definitely moving forward, and I guess it's a bright future out there. So onwards and upwards from my point of view.
I love it. And I want to come back to the roadblocks and some of those bumps in the path in just a moment, but would love to get everyone else's opinion. So, Mr. Wolpert, since we have two Johns, I'll refer to you as that or the Magic Bus. Same question to you. Where are we in this process? Anything further to add as well?
Well, I think this is not only the year of the mainnet, apparently, because this is, what is the hashtag for this, mainnet 2020?
Mainnet 2020.
Which, you know, we were talking about using just for the baseline stuff. And so it was great to see, you know, a wider community. I mean, what, thousands of people are on this thing for mainnet 2020. So yeah, I guess we're here in and we've been waiting for this for 5 years. I know Paul and I have been, York too, where you know, where we can start to converge. And I've been lobbying John on this as the chair of the EEA, that, you know, now we needed the EEA to be a separate thing from other Ethereum stuff for a while, because you need to cook that up. But now, I mean, I have to think there's not a different standard for enterprise or anyone else, and it's just the Ethereum standard, right? And so that's where so this era of convergence, I like the win-wins. I'm much more of a win-win kind of a person. I don't like to make other people lose to make myself win. This, you know, I don't keep score playing any sport that I can think of. I'm just not that kind of a person. So I like to enter this era of convergence where we get to win together. And I think that's where we're at. And it's also the era of boring, and that boring is good. After 5 years of hype, I'm kind of excited, and partly my fault. It's kind of exciting to be boring. I got a call from the federal government, U.S. federal government. I don't think I'm telling any tales here. And they said, and they instead of calling up saying, "What's blockchain and how can I do something with it?" They said, "We've been looking at the baseline protocol, and we think we can use it for this." And this was, I won't say what it is, but it's just the simplest, dumbest thing, but it makes sense. It would add value. And it basically makes a catalog of information verifiably consistent with another catalog of information, which ultimately becomes procurement. But they could just do that. And instead of having a conversation that ends in, well, let's do a design session and waste a lot of your time and money thinking about innovative ideas. No, it was, yeah, let's do that. Done. End of conversation. That's what we need. When you start to see that, you know you've got something.
Right, and I agree. I think you know, to that point, York. I mean, at Microsoft, from the research I've done and conversations I've had with everyone on this panel, I mean, you guys are in all parts of this world and continuing to grow in more. From your perspective, where is all of this truly? From Microsoft, and then again, your perspective, also being a part of EEA and others.
Yeah, I mean, from a Microsoft perspective, we look at technology as an enabler, and wherever the technology plays a role in enabling new patterns, you know, we feel a need to help participate in that and collaborate, and that's, you know, why I collaborate with the fine gentleman on the screen here. And, you know, we're excited to see the potential. You know, from my personal journey perspective, I started out seeing the potential of a mainnet, specifically Ethereum mainnet, when I got into the space in 2015, and knowing that, probably like John and maybe a little bit like Paul, knowing that the journey across a chasm is actually quite hard, right? It's not one leap, it is multiple steps, right? And so I've often said that the, you know, permissioned private blockchain environments are stepping stones to crossing that chasm. And the project that we started, you know, between Paul and John and I about 9 months ago, I think at this point, was really with the thesis of how do we actually prove that mainnet can solve for problems of an enterprise in a way that will be acceptable. And so, you know, the teams did amazing work, just, you know, looking at existing technologies, combining them together such that we could actually answer the, you know, top 10 questions we would get from a CISO or an IT shop or what have you. So that particular baseline pattern is actually quite exciting in that regard. It's not the only way that enterprises will go, but it is probably the simplest way to use a common message bus. And if you take a step back just a moment from the mainnet, and you think about the challenges of enterprises collaborating together, it's a combination of having a common message bus, right, which we really haven't seen at scale before, and identity, right? And so if you can identify the endpoints that digitally identify the endpoints that you're collaborating with, and then collaborate with them in a secure way over a common message bus, then you've basically got something that has significant scale and market sort of target market opportunity.
I think that's a key message that has been missing, probably amongst the conversation about blockchain in the enterprise in general, right? Private versus public, nonetheless, like having that common thread. IT infrastructure, most people think is very boring, and in some cases it is, as John mentioned. It also takes huge leaps and bounds and a long time frame to make small, let alone significant changes to that. And again, the commonality usually within that stack is, some kind of common piece of technology, right? Some common piece of piping that's connecting everything together. And that was also mentioned in an earlier panel as well around Web3 and DApp-based development stacks and the need for these types of things. So you're bringing up an absolutely great point, and I'm going to come back to it. But Paul, you just gave this talk. We just talked about how EY is working with hundreds of companies at this point in different respects. With all that being said, where are we? You're talking to many of these companies on a daily basis. So where are we really at with this?
First of all, can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Loud and clear. And the
All
shirt,
right,
it
thank
must be
goodness
the
for that.
shirt. It must be the shirt.
It could be. It's interfering. Actually, I figure if your computer has come on, it's just the compression algorithm is struggling with the shirt. But where we are is this. I will tell you this story. That's a really good one. So about 3 years ago, the design for network procurement, a lot of the key ideas came to us from a large client, and we built the solution for them on a private blockchain. We built a prototype, everything, and we're having kind of the final review, and the client's like, "This is fantastic. We're going to save hundreds of millions of dollars." They had their CISO on, their Chief Information Security Officer on. He's like, "Yeah, I'm quite satisfied with the security you put in for the private blockchain. We're really we think this is really well executed, and we're not going to implement." And we're like, I was writing the press release in my head, and he's like, "We're not moving forward." And long story short, I know you're going to say too late. The answer was, we don't want to go first. Blockchain's new and scary. And a couple of years ago, we heard a lot of, we don't want to go first. Now we hear a lot more of, yes, we are ready for this. And most people are not fully ready for public blockchains, but what they now love is, if I build it on Ethereum private, I can migrate it to public. So that's one of the big things that we're moving along. And whereas 2 years ago, or even a year ago, we had zero conversations going on about using public blockchain technology in enterprise, I would say that today we have at least a dozen ongoing sales cycles and a couple of implementations where we are getting ready to implement meaningful business transactions with security on public networks. So, and what always happens is you need one player at the front to unleash the flood, to open up the flood. And so if I think about like the thing that Microsoft did, one of the best things that Microsoft did early on with the Xbox is they said, we will go first. And that had a big impact on the rest of the industry and other companies that sell and manage IP. I'm very comfortable that in the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to be announcing a bunch of other, we're ready to go first in different industries and segments.
Yeah, that's I think we're starting to see that in many of these conversations and just general announcements as well, right? It's no longer a press release of, hey, we're thinking, or hey, we're trying, or hey, we're piloting, which is the new pivot. It's instead we're actually doing this, and we're finding ways to deploy it, and you may never know that it exists as well. And Mr. Wolper, I see you got a question.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was something Paul said just got me thinking. It is correct that it's nice to be able to just go from something you're already working on in Solidity or what have you to deploying it publicly, and you can back and forth. But it's probably worth saying, Paul, and correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, that if you build the wrong thing on private, like if you put a bunch of data on it, if you think of it as a more secure database, or as John Whelan's correctly says, a private shared state machine. If you think of it that way, and you think of it as a CRUD layer, you start putting a lot of data on it, thinking it's private and careful and secure. First of all, it's not, because the worst admin in your consortium is going to blow your cover for everyone. Hard enough to keep your data private even when you're the only admin running it. So you've got now a massively expanded threat surface. So I mean, some of the best private blockchain projects I know simply anchor hashes to their private blockchain and then use the word as buzzword compliant marketing, right? But if you use it that way, you won't be able to migrate to the mainnet, because you'll have data there that you don't want on a public database or a public ledger. So you have to use it correctly. You have to think about it as a piece of middleware. And if I think we can do a lot more in production at scale. I mean, even the best private blockchain implementations that I know that, and I think my old boss at IBM kind of got us going on this, talking about, I mean, the CEO, the former CEO would say, we're in production, but it wasn't so much in production insofar as if it went down, anybody would care. I mean, yes, it was running transactions, but nobody would really care. Your business didn't go down. They had lots of redundant systems. So what this approach of saying, hey, it's middleware, you can start using that in production and at scale if you do it correctly today.
And John Whelan, you're on mute.
Misconception about private blockchains versus public blockchains. I can clarify this because I've been doing both for a while. The idea behind private permissioned ledger systems to be broader than blockchains are a part of the DLT ecosystem, is to solve the 3 Ps: privacy, permissioning, performance. You'll hear me say that a lot. I have been saying that since 2015 and 16 and 17 and 18 Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. The 3 Ps: privacy, permissioning, performance. Now, there are certain things that you need to do, particularly in high value applications. In financial services, for example, the amazing thing that inspired financial services to be the first industry to jump on board the DLT wave is we realized very quickly that these systems are just ledgers. They're record-keeping systems where multiple parties can interact together, and every party in theory can hold a copy, and every party can know that their copy is true because of the laws of mathematics and cryptography. It's a beautiful thing. We all know this. Now, basically, that spurred the initial conception of why don't we take what came from the public world and build our version according to our business requirements. And by the way, business requirements from a financial institution ain't going to change, right? We're not going to change the business requirements around privacy, regulatorily, all of these things, auditability, all of these things. So we were inspired to go ahead and begin the first, going back to 2016, the first proofs of concept on private permission systems. What we realized along the way is that the coordination cost and the setup cost and the arrangement cost among multiple actors is extremely high. The software may be open source, but the consortium is not. The software may be free to download, but the consortium needs vendors, technology providers. Even before you get 4 banks in a room together to discuss a consortium, you probably spent $500,000 on legal fees just to organize the collaboration arrangement. So unless you're dealing with very, very high value applications, and there are some, lots to look at in the financial services world, which I think is where the initial kind of traction of success has been, then you have to look at an alternative. And the alternative then is, can you use the public blockchain in a way that meets your business requirements? And it's really only recently that we've had the tools, again, thanks folks on this call for making these tools available, free open source to the world, no license, love it, that we're able to do these things. So we're going to see a convergence. And I've always believed this from the day the EEA was founded, that we're going to see a convergence between mainnet and public or private permission net and hybrids. And eventually they're all going to interoperate together, probably with some kind of anchoring to the mainnet in this baseline concept. So that's kind of like the connection between mainnet versus private net. And from a programming point of view, the developer's point of view, there's no difference between the two, except you got to be more careful on the mainnet.
Taj, I see you shaking your head. Anything to add to this point as well?
Well, I think the convergence is an interesting concept. I mean, we're going to see, as we see more and more blockchains, private and public, interoperability between them is going to be more important. One reason for building stuff on the Ethereum mainnet is the ability to interoperate with other applications that are also on the same blockchain, same mainnet. But there are other ways for chains to interoperate. So private chains can interoperate with public chains. So it's going to be interesting to see this kind of flourishing of different environments and how they can interact.
And speaking of interoperability, I mean, this is, I would argue, one of the big roadblocks that's probably preventing a lot of people, besides the private versus public and the whole infrastructure having to change debates. But how do you see some of these roadblocks, us actually getting over them, right? Either as an executive or as a developer, IT, non-IT, how can we move forward and make, mainnet a part of the enterprise sooner than later?
So this is an interesting question. Actually, within the EEA, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, we have a working group called the Mainnet Working Group. And this is kind of a new thing for EEA. EEA has historically been focused on private chains, but the Mainnet Working Group started last year, and it's kind of a shift in thinking, or like the first branching out into EEA doing stuff involving Ethereum mainnet, the public Ethereum mainnet. So one of the task forces, there are several task forces within the working group, is trying to understand enterprise use cases for Ethereum mainnet, and in particular to understand what are the perceived benefits and also the challenges or barriers to people building these things on Ethereum mainnet. So we've been doing a survey, and we haven't published a report yet, but I can kind of tease up a couple of data points that we've seen. So first on benefits, people mentioned as the benefits, the most commonly mentioned things that people mentioned were security and interoperability. So people consider public Ethereum mainnet to be very secure, potentially more secure than private chains, depending on how it's implemented. And also interoperability is a big benefit that people see in building on mainnet. So their applications can interact with other applications that are on the same chain. We also asked people about the challenges or barriers or things that impediments to building on public chains and Ethereum mainnet. So a few things. One was that the most commonly mentioned thing was data locality and privacy, i.e. I have private data and I don't want to share it with the world. And this is really not something that is going to be solved by layer one technology. This is going to be solved by design patterns and proper choice of technology and proper design of the application, just to not store data, sensitive data on layer one on a private chain. There are a lot of ways to deal with this. You can sort off chain, you can have layer twos, but this is really kind of an educational thing, not a technology problem. So it's a matter of educating people on the proper way to design applications. A couple other things that were commonly mentioned. One is identity. So there is a need for more work on identity, whatever that means to you. Identity is a wide range, wide area. Yes.
A comment on that. So the EEA just released the latest version of the NTETH specification. Turns out that there's an identity component to that for private permission chains that relates to corporate identity and organizational identity in a manner that typical corporate IT people would understand. Talking to some of our colleagues, their attitude was the work that's been done there is probably immediately transferable to the public chain, maybe with a tweak or two. We have to take that version of the spec, push it over to you guys in the mainnet working group and have at it. And because if that work's already been done for private permission chains and is reusable, let's move it over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the identity is a wide area. There is corporate identity, there's individual identity, there's verified identity, there's self-sovereign identity. But yeah, all of these areas need solving.
Yeah, and I do think that area is merging together. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of work that's been going on in parallel to the blockchain space in the identity realm, specifically what people have been calling, self-sovereign identities or decentralized identities. But the reality is, these are verifiable proofs about the state of something. And when we have a digital identity, whether it's a person or an institution or a thing, we have to have reputation associated with that digital identity, and that requires verifying parties and relying parties. And so there's actually fairly well-established patterns that are working their way through the W3C now, both for verifiable claims as well as decentralized identities. Being able to, for example, have a corporation register an identity through an Ethereum address with verifiable claims associated with it is already an established pattern. And so being able to use that both in the context of public endpoints, right, that you can verify in a baseline context, or even in a private use case that doesn't particularly use baseline, or you even use as a private blockchain scenario, right, where you could actually leverage some identity as essentially as a registry. And this has been something that we've talked about quite a bit in the baseline scenario as well, because it is a scenario that's required anytime you do digital transactions. So, if you look at the parallel to the world of e-commerce, we did not start doing commerce across the internet until corporations were comfortable that they had guarantees in place that they were talking to a Microsoft.com or an Xbox.com because of a validator network called DNS, right? That has basically, 5 to 20 validators who are actually running that network, right? Which stand up our understanding of what current identity means from a web perspective on the internet. And so the other technology there, just as an example, fairly simplistic technology, the SSL sort of certificates and connections, right? That allow you to comfortably transact a commerce transaction across the internet is very similar to this evolution of technology that we're seeing now in the blockchain space. And I want to harken back to one of the things that John Wolpert was saying earlier about design patterns is, whenever we design technical solutions, we're always designing around current constraints with a view towards future capabilities. And in an ideal world, you design without painting yourself into a corner, right? Because some future capabilities are coming, but you always design around certain parameters. And John Whalen, articulated the 3 Ps earlier that we design around in the blockchain space. So even in the context of a blockchain that is a private blockchain, and I'll agree with you, John Wolpert, there's a lot of mistakes that people have made, right, in thinking blockchain is a database and therefore just throwing everything into the database. But if you properly design,
I'm a professional mistake maker. Right? My day is not complete unless I've made a big.
And we learn best from failure, right? So we need to see the mistakes and the failures in order to understand patterns and anti-patterns. But to that point, if you actually design a private blockchain environment, even in a consortium context with, say 8 or 9 parties, you will run up against the same constraints that you have in a public message bus space as well, where you have, privacy groups of 3 to 4 parties that are allowed to share data together. You'll have, the open public part of that consortium that, has some metadata that everybody's allowed to see, but you have the same constraints where you don't want your competitor to be able to see transaction volumes with your suppliers. That's no different if designed properly in a private context as it is in a public Ethereum context or a baseline context. And therefore, designed properly, private blockchains actually create a great stepping stone and test net effectively to get to the ability to actually deploy on a public utility like the Ethereum Mainnet.
Yeah, can I add to that, Kyle?
Yeah, go for
it. It strikes me that I'm reminded of a phrase. I used to do a lot of work in the innovation management space, and I remember just getting sick of that word too. Now I'm sick of decentralization and tokens, and I just get sick of words fast. And back in those days, it was innovation, right? Oh, it's innovative, and I'm like, where did we devalue the word improvement? Maybe radical improvement's a good thing. Again, Clay Christensen, rest his soul, used to say radical innovation or stable or sustaining innovation. I'm like, no. Kurzweil had a better phrase. Innovation is binary. It's either paradigm shift or not. And so we can design for it, as John said, the 2 Ps, and we can design for that. The problem is if you're talking about a world computer, or I might want to call it the world's computer, there is no singleton that can handle all the reads and writes of every application in the world, period. It's never going to happen, right? But if you you can innovate by changing the terms of the game. You can say, let's make those 3 Ps irrelevant. Let's admit that it will never be fast. It will never have low latency. It will never scale. What can we use it for then? Well, ordering and hash management. We can probably get it to scale to handle the last resort ordering and hash management, far away from users, way down in the plumbing, the most boring thing you can think of. And we will not have marketing departments for blockchain, right? It'll be like having a marketing department for C++, right? Or Word, or deeper, right? Like UDP. So I think that's where this is going, right? And I don't know, maybe the other panelists have a different point of view, but that's, I think, ordering and hash management sounds like a terrible way to market blockchain, but I think that is it.
Taj and John are both shaking their heads like, yes, 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 yes.
Actually, I was really enjoying what Taz was saying about the pre-results of this survey about the barriers to adoption. I've got one in mind, which I'd like to maybe poll my illustrious colleagues here, because I've been thinking about it for a while. But Taj, maybe you can keep going on the things that we need to see before mainnet becomes more acceptable.
Yeah, so a couple other points I can mention that we observed from the survey. So one is that a little bit surprising is that performance or throughput was not a major consideration or issue for most of the respondents. So most people were not considering high throughput applications. They were considering things that only involve a small number of transactions per day or per hour, per second, which includes things like baseline. So there's a lot you can do with a low transaction rate.
And I often remind people that when it comes to companies transacting with each other, the 30 in net 30 is not milliseconds, it's days.
Exactly. So there's certainly maybe other applications that are high throughput that are not being considered today, but there's certainly a lot that can be done with the current Ethereum 1 throughput capacity, and many applications that can be built, including baseline-like applications that don't require high throughput. That was interesting to see. And another concern that people mentioned that can be addressed through technological development is what we call the noisy neighbors problem. So, for example, the CryptoKitties took over the network a couple of years ago and bogged down a lot of transactions because it was taking up most of the network's capacity. So people are concerned about that sort of thing. There are solutions in the works to that. Ethereum 2 was starting in scalability. Layer 2 applications should be built on Layer 2. So Layer 2 solutions technologies are evolving rapidly. Probably in the next quarter or two, like later this year, we'll see fully mature Layer 2 scaling solutions that people can build on top of, and that will cause less concern for this sort of noisy neighbors problem. Also, solutions around gas pricing and gas. So there are various technological solutions in the works to address this particular noisy neighbor problem. So it's a combination of education and also technology, and we're trying to figure out what are the priorities, where to focus on developing technology versus educating people about the right way to do things.
There's a range of. Oh, sorry, John.
Oh, go ahead, Paul. You have it. Yeah.
I was going to say there's and a lot of these things really address kind of a range of what I'll call the FUD factor that gets deployed against, especially the public mainnet. Oh, it's not fast enough, right? I need sub-millisecond transactions, but your business isn't at 30. Right? Oh, there's the noisy neighbor problem. Oh, it can't scale. It's not like Visa and MasterCard, right? A lot of very sort of unfair, unreasonable, or unnecessary comparisons are made. Or my personal favorite, you'll all go to prison if you use it. You can't have crypto assets, right? We're like, let's ignore the fact that one of the world's biggest accounting and auditing firms has been auditing hundreds of blockchain companies for years now. Right, there's so much FUD that is deployed against this, and so many comparisons between this, which is 10 years old, and technology that's 50 years old or 60 years old, and it's very it's challenging to sell against. But it almost every single one of these problems is being addressed and being scaled and being managed in a way that gives me a lot of confidence in the future. And it's such a tough thing. When you're trying to sell against a mature solution, a relatively new technology platform, but this is part of what we have to do, and people will get more comfortable over time. Especially, people are like, "Oh, ETH 2.0, it's never coming." Yes, it is, right? I mean, it's not any later than my new Tesla. Let's put it that way.
Well, and to that point, I mean, I think from a lot of the research I've done, and just being in technology for a bit myself, is nothing comes fast enough. And I think we all forget, and it's constantly reminded of, the internet, as the internet is today, did not happen overnight. Right? The applications that we have, the phones that we have, these pieces, whether they're hardware, software, or infrastructure at its core, did not happen overnight. The thing is, more rapidly we're seeing new deployments of these things and seeing many more of them doesn't mean things have progressed, right? I mean, in some cases, you look at where applications were to when mobile applications came, and from when mobile applications came to this early days of connected devices to now the early days of blockchain and DLT. These things take time to build up, and at the enterprise, I think we're all pushing it, saying, "Come on, let's go." And you bring up the good point of net 30 is 30 days. Most of those situations, you're 60, 90, or 120. So realistically, your Visa-like transactions are going to be 10,000x what your net 30 or 60 or 90 currently is, to your point. So I think that's a great point. John, I interrupted you, so sorry.
Well, I have a very specific and tangible ask to the development community out there. Hopefully some of you are watching. One of the challenges that a financial institution would have, for example, and I'm speaking here from some, just discussions with my colleagues in the financial institution world, is having to actually touch the native network token, Ether or similar, to pay for gas for transactions. So it would be wonderful if there was a relayer service that would accept meta transactions, in other words, gasless transactions from a financial institution that might want to issue a bond or trade a bond or issue a stable coin or trade a stable coin. I'm speaking hypothetically here, and could submit that gasless transaction through a relayer, and that relayer was financial industry grade, fully compliant, fully audited, does all the things right, in a way that that relayer would procure the necessary Ether from whatever sources in a compliant manner, from sources that are regulated in whatever jurisdictions in which they operate. And then me or a financial institution could pay a simple monthly fee. I want to pay $1,000 per month for my transactions that are processed this month. These are high value transactions. That $1,000 per month is minuscule compared with the cost of actually executing a particular securities transaction or similar. So I think that there's an opportunity. We've seen this now with Tabuki and OpenZeppelin and the gas station network, and Argent Wallet, which just launched recently, which is a very nice relayer service built in. I think there's a room here for one of the relayers that currently exists to upgrade their service, make it financial industry compliant, and it comes with a business model already. You pay X for the Ether, you mark it up, and you charge Y per month as your service. And it's there, and it's coming. So that's an ask that I have as a participant in the ecosystem that sees a specific need.
Yeah, I totally agree with that requirement, because we see the same issues with enterprise clients. As soon as you need to pay with a native token or any token, now you've got a discussion with Treasury, right? And so that, right, and am I able to hold cryptocurrencies? And what does that mean from a tax perspective? What does that mean from a risk perspective? It's a whole different conversation. Just imagine, your typical IT development team having to have that conversation. That's pretty hard, right? So I completely agree.
Stripe level easy. It needs to be easy like Stripe, right?
It has to be delivered by a company, and this is I'm absolutely showing consensus here. It has to be delivered by a company that has enough heft to be able to handle the float issues, the money management issues, because I think you have to pay the gas and then bill in arrears. Otherwise, Paul's company can tell you for sure, according to Gap, you would actually be still holding crypto through an intermediary, and that might not be okay.
You're just charging a service fee to execute transactions, and the Ether is part of your cost of goods sold.
That's right, which is very clean if you bill it in normal, net 30, right? But that means you've got to pay gas, hold the risk, and bill it.
John, you're over engineering it. It's not needed to do that. I actually think it's a more simple problem. This is a service. This is a transaction processing service, no different than any other transaction processing service that an institution might use. By the way, it does not need to be a company with heft either. I think a nimble enough startup with the right compliance attitude that is willing to do something meaningful, and they already exist, and pick up a client or two and scale from there. You don't have to show up with billions of dollars in capital to build this. You actually build a nice service, maybe find a partner or two that's willing to be with you on the journey as you scale, and that's fine. But I'd like to see one, because I haven't seen one yet.
You know, it's also just
you need to be able to manage the fluctuation though too. Right.
Well, that's a separate problem.
we don't need to design the solution here.
Yeah. So York, you have a comment on it. I know we're going to do this offline. So let's come to you for your thoughts.
No, just very quickly, you know, one of the things that ways that Microsoft works very collaboratively with startups is we have a cloud service called Azure. So shilling the cloud service for a moment here, but connecting the data, the points between, you know, John's scrappy startup and enterprises from a contractual perspective is actually quite difficult. And one of the things that we do in Azure is if a startup is providing a SaaS-based service similar to what John is describing, and has commerce enabled, essentially they can charge directly to a enterprise client that has an Azure account. We, as an intermediary, can basically handle the financial transaction on behalf of the startup. So this actually provides significant scale for startups generally, who don't now have to spend a year contracting with, you know, whatever the large enterprises that they would like to offer the service to.
And to play on John's last point of his call out to developers or our new company, we're all starting here in about an hour and a half, and we're all set. You know, there are a lot of questions. Taj mentioned education is a big factor in this whole process that we're going through. So to the five of you as the experts in this space, what is maybe one or two pieces of advice, one for the executive looking to get into bringing the mainnet into their organization? And then, and additionally, to the developers, to the IT departments, because sometimes those are very separated. So let's start with, from the executive side, what's a piece of advice you would give from your learnings, from your research, or, you know, Paul, York, and John, the experiences you had as executives implementing this, to those out there listening? And then we'll come back around for the developers, because I think that's going to be key for us to wrap up with as we transition into the next half of the show. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you. In terms of advice, what would you give to an executive looking to bring mainnet into their enterprise or corporation or small business?
Do one thing, do it well, and get a return on investment. It's really that simple. I mean, there are so many of these projects I see where, like, it does this, it slices, it chops, it dices. No, wait, there's more. No, do one thing. That if you get return on investment, then everything else will follow. If you don't, too many things depend on very complicated network effects. Just pick one thing that you're going to do and do it really well. I mean, that's been a lot of my approach to EY. It's why we don't build applications on 20 different platforms, because you can't build great applications on 20 different platforms. We build them on one, right? And that's why I think we're very good at Ethereum. And so it would be the same advice I would give that I take, which is just pick one thing and do it well.
Great. York, to you.
Yeah, I would say, I think as an executive specifically, one, you have to have, I mean, this is an innovation journey, right? So sorry for using that word, but that's what it is. You have to have the fortitude to see it through. And I think Paul's advice about, you know, picking something simple that does have an ROI, that doesn't get scope creep and add on 10 other features that actually don't apply to the ROI. And getting it done quickly and proving the ROI, which will only happen once it's in production, is the journey you have to go on. I do think executives will need competent partners like EY and Consensus and others who really understand the technology, because while they have the vision, they do need not just the, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I had a glitch, but you know they'll need to understand the current state of affairs, and have help designing around current state, but also with the view to future state.
Taj.
Yeah, I would just kind of add on to Paul's one thing is that pick the right thing. So Ethereum is a lot of things to a lot of people, and like it slices and dices. It's kind of the elephant and the blind man. So picking the right thing for your business is very important, because if you try to use Ethereum to do something that maybe is not a good fit, or the technology is not quite there yet for that application, it's going to fail. So pick something that makes sense given your business and the state of Ethereum technology today, and then build on that.
Mr. Whalen, and then Mr. Wolpert will come to you last.
I would say, as an executive speaking to my peers, find your smartest, most inquisitive, most innovation-friendly internal attorney, and make her. And by the way, there are a lot of women attorneys that I encounter in all of the blockchain work that we're doing with. Make her a key part of the team from the very beginning. That's what we did internally, actually. My colleague Monica is phenomenal. And it's as necessary. There are 3 legs to the stool. Technical, we got that. Legal, harder to find, and then business will come. So that's my advice.
Mr. Wolpert.
Couldn't agree more with you, John, on that. And also that was the great thing with Ernst & Young, working with their independence team. We got it right. We're not worried that we're just loosey-goosey here. And I'll take a little over-engineering on this stuff, because you can't screw around with company data and PII. So in this case, I'd say the only other thing is you've got to get your legal right. You also got to get your policy right. And I just put a link. I try to find how many people are watching this. There's a lot. And so I want to take the opportunity to say, go to that link and get your CEO to say the top line in that thing to make it safe for you and others to be involved with public blockchain projects, because you all know now you don't have to own crypto. You don't have to be into speculation or any of that stuff. You can use it as a common sense thing that your CISO will not lose her mind or his mind over. And you shouldn't be managed out of the business by mentioning the public mainnet in some situation. So that's what we have to fix this year. We did it in 2015. Nobody wanted to say blockchain, and then we all went, blockchain's not Bitcoin, and everybody was fine with it then. We have to do the same thing with mainnet now.
Absolutely agree. And guys, unfortunately, we are at time, and I do have to kick everyone off because we have to take a quick short break as well. But last but not least, Taj, John, York, Paul, each and every one of you, thank you. A big thank you to the Ethereum Foundation, to the EEA, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, to EY, to Microsoft, and to both Consensus and Baseline.